The desert holds secrets in its ancient dust. Sarah Blackwood stood frozen on the ridge, heart pounding as she spotted blue cavalry uniforms moving through the canyon below. 20 soldiers, weapons ready, advancing toward the Apache camp where her lover waited, unaware. She knew what bloodshed would follow. 2 worlds at war, and she alone stood between them. The settlement folk would call her traitor. The Apache might kill her as spy, but something deeper than fear pulled her forward. The same invisible thread that had drawn her to Red Hawk in the forbidden shadows beyond the fort's walls. What power could transform an ordinary woman into a legend that would be whispered around Apache fires for generations to come? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Blackwood's trading post stood on the edge of possibility. Too far from Copper Springs to be properly part of the settlement, too close to be truly free of its judgments, just as she preferred it. The morning light filtered through the calico curtains she'd sewn during those first lonely months after Thomas died, casting honeyed patterns across the rough-hewn counter where she now sorted trade goods. Her fingers paused on a small brass locket. Opening it revealed a lock of Thomas's hair, brown now faded to the color of prairie grass. 3 years gone, taken by the fever that had swept through their wagon train. The same fever that had left her alone in this unforgiving territory, with nothing but his dreams of a trading empire and her own stubborn refusal to return east, defeated. Best keep moving, she murmured to herself, slipping the locket back into the pocket of her dress. The cavalry's arrival in town yesterday meant business would be brisker than usual. Soldiers always needed tobacco and whiskey, though Colonel Westfield had made it clear he disapproved of a woman running such an establishment unaccompanied. The sheriff had been by last evening ostensibly to warn her about increased Apache activity. "You're vulnerable out here, Mrs. Blackwood," Sheriff Holloway had said, thumbs hooked in his belt loops, eyes drifting toward her modest living quarters behind the store. "Woman alone. Might be best if you considered selling." Reverend Mills mentioned his cousins looking for just such an opportunity, no doubt. The Reverend had made his disapproval of her independent ways clear from the pulpit, though he never refused the quality tea she imported from San Francisco. A soft knock at the side door pulled her from her thoughts. Martha Cleary stood there, basket in hand, the only other woman who bothered with Sarah anymore. "Brought you some fresh bread," Martha said, setting her basket on the counter. Her eyes were rimmed red. "Tom Jr.'s down with the croup again." The willow bark tea didn't help. Sarah reached beneath the counter for the small medicine bundle she kept for friends. "Some, but—" Martha glanced toward the door. "There's talk in town. Colonel's men found signs of Apache not 5 miles from here. They're saying a raid's coming." Her voice dropped. "They're saying those who trade with Indians are asking for trouble. Reverend called you out by name after service." Sarah's jaw tightened. "I trade with anyone who has goods to offer or coin to spend. That's business, not politics. You know it's more than that out here." Martha placed a hand on Sarah's arm. "Be careful, Sarah. Some of the men were in their cups at Mulligan's last night, talking about how certain white women need reminding of where their loyalties should lie." After Martha left, Sarah locked the door and pressed her forehead against the cool wood. From the shelf above her bed, Thomas's old army field glasses gleamed dully in the sunlight. She'd used them just 3 nights ago, standing on the ridge beyond the creek, watching as Red Hawk's hunting party returned to their camp in the shadow of Shadow Mesa. She fingered the small leather pouch hidden beneath her collar. A medicine bundle Red Hawk's grandmother had pressed into her palm when she'd brought cornmeal to trade last month. Protection, the old woman had indicated in the mixture of Spanish, Apache, and gestures they used to communicate. Sarah had been needing protection long before the cavalry arrived, but now, with rumors spreading through Copper Springs like wildfire, she wondered if any medicine would be strong enough to stand against the storm that was coming. The first time Red Hawk came to her trading post alone, Sarah's heart had hammered against her ribs like a frightened bird. Usually the Apache sent groups of 3 or 4 to trade, women mostly, sometimes with a warrior standing silent guard. But that autumn afternoon, as the cottonwoods along the creek turned gold, he had appeared in her doorway like a shadow, tall and watchful, his obsidian eyes missing nothing. "I have pelts," he'd said in careful English, startling her. Few of the Apache she'd met spoke her language. She'd nodded, conscious of the sweat dampening her palms as she moved to examine his goods. The pelts were exceptional, fox and rabbit, expertly prepared, worth far more than the usual trade. "These are fine work," she'd said, fighting to keep her voice steady. His eyes had met hers then, direct and uncompromising. "I prepare myself, not like others." Something in his gaze told her he wasn't just talking about the pelts. Sarah had offered him a fair trade: coffee, sugar, salt, and a small mirror. He'd accepted with a slight nod, but lingered, examining her shelves with obvious curiosity. When he reached for a book, her copy of Emerson's essays, she'd nearly snatched it back. Books were precious, irreplaceable, but his hands were gentle as he opened it, fingers tracing the printed words with something like reverence. "You read these marks?" he asked. "Yes. Would you like to see?" The words had escaped before she could consider their impropriety. That was the beginning. He'd stayed nearly an hour as she showed him how the strange marks on paper captured words, ideas, stories. When he finally left, the sun was setting, painting the desert in fire. 3 days later, he returned with more pelts and a small bundle, wrapped in deerskin. "Medicine," he explained, placing it on her counter. "From grandmother, for woman who respects the words on paper." Inside was a small leather pouch containing dried herbs and a single hawk feather. The old woman had recognized something in Sarah that her own people had missed, a seeker perhaps. A woman not content to live in the narrow confines prescribed for her. Over the weeks that followed, Red Hawk came more frequently. Each visit lasted longer. They were careful. He never arrived when other customers might see, and she never recorded their transactions in her ledger. But in those stolen hours, something grew between them that Sarah could neither name nor deny. He taught her words in his language, simple things at first: water, sky, horse. She showed him more books, explained the stories held within their pages. He told her of his people's oral traditions, tales passed down through generations of how the world came to be. "Your people write stories that stay the same," he said once. "Our stories live, change like river." "Which is better?" she'd asked. His smile had been rare and transformative. "Both have power." Sarah learned he was the chief's sister's son, being trained in the old ways by the tribe's medicine man, Tall Pine. His position was one of respect, responsibility. The risk he took in coming to her was as great as hers in welcoming him. One evening, as he prepared to leave, their hands had brushed across the counter, a touch that lasted barely a heartbeat, yet sent heat racing up her arm. "It is dangerous," he said quietly. "This path between worlds." "Yes," she'd answered, not pretending to misunderstand. He'd nodded once, solemn. "Tomorrow, creek bend, when sun touches mountaintop." It wasn't a question, but she'd answered anyway. "I'll be there." That night, clutching Thomas's locket, she'd whispered an apology to her dead husband's memory, but even as guilt twisted within her, Sarah knew she would go to the creek the next day. Some forces were stronger than propriety, stronger even than grief. Some paths, once glimpsed, could not be abandoned. The creek whispered secrets as it tumbled over smooth stones. Sarah sat on a fallen cottonwood, skirts arranged carefully to avoid the damp earth, watching golden light stretch across the valley. She told herself she was a fool a dozen times. On the walk here, what respectable widow met an Apache warrior alone at sunset? The answer was simple: no respectable widow did. Yet here she sat, heart fluttering like a captive sparrow against her ribs. "You came." Red Hawk's voice startled her. He moved like water over stone, silent, purposeful. "I said I would." She straightened her spine, determined not to show how his sudden appearance unsettled her. He settled beside her, leaving a proper distance between them. From a pouch at his waist, he withdrew a rolled piece of deerskin, which he carefully unfurled. Across their laps, intricate markings covered its surface, dots, lines, and symbols Sarah didn't recognize. "Star map," he explained, pointing upward to where the first evening stars were appearing. "Our ancestors learned to read the sky long before your people came. Over the next hour, as darkness fell completely, he taught her the Apache names for constellations, explaining how they guided his people through seasons and journeys." Sarah found herself entranced, not just by the knowledge, but by the low cadence of his voice, the careful way he bridged their different worlds with words. "This one," he said, pointing to a cluster of stars just rising over the eastern ridge, "is the Great Spirit's fire. It appears when summer comes, brings the warm rains." "We call it Aquila, the eagle," Sarah replied. "My father taught me the stars when I was a girl." "Your father was wise, man." Sarah smiled at the memory. "A teacher. He believed women should learn the same as men, though many disagreed. He gave me books when others said they'd fill my head with dangerous ideas." "All-powerful ideas dangerous," Red Hawk said with quiet certainty. "This why medicine men guard knowledge carefully." Their meetings continued through the changing moon cycles. Sometimes they simply talked, exchanging words in each other's languages. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, watching bats flit across the darkening sky. He brought her things. A perfectly shaped arrowhead, a sprig of desert sage, once a piece of turquoise polished smooth. She shared her books, reading aloud from Wordsworth and Thoreau as he listened, eyes closed, absorbing the rhythm of unfamiliar words. On the night of the autumn equinox, he asked her to accompany him farther up the creek, to a sheltered pool, where the water ran deep and clear. "Special place," he explained. "Sacred. Stars reflect in water like second sky below." Sarah hesitated only briefly before gathering her skirts and following him along the narrow deer path. The risk was considerable. If anyone from the settlement discovered them together like this, her reputation would be beyond salvation. Yet something more profound than curiosity propelled her forward. At the pool, Red Hawk built a small fire, just enough to cast a gentle glow across the water. Then he sat cross-legged on a flat rock and invited her to join him. "Tonight, balance between seasons," he said. "Good time for learning deep knowledge." From a pouch, he produced a handful of fine cornmeal. With practiced movements, he began to sprinkle it on the stone between them, creating intricate patterns that reminded Sarah of the star map. "My people believe all things connected," he said as his fingers worked. "Stars to earth, rain to corn, past to future." He paused, dark eyes meeting hers across the growing pattern. "Your people to mine." That night, beneath a canopy of stars reflected in the still pool, Sarah felt herself irrevocably changed, no longer fully of the world she'd been born to, yet not belonging to his either. They were creating something between. A fragile bridge, across chasms of history and hatred. Dangerous, yes, perhaps impossible. But in that moment, with the night wrapped around them like a blanket, impossibility felt like merely another threshold to cross. The cavalry rode into Copper Springs on a Tuesday, a column of dust rising behind them like the tail of some great beast. Sarah watched from the doorway of her trading post as 20 blue-coated men trotted their lathered horses down the settlement's only proper street. At their head rode Colonel Westfield, ramrod straight in the saddle, his grey moustache precisely trimmed beneath a hawk-like nose. Trouble, she thought, retreating inside to busy herself with inventory. The army never brought anything else to these borderlands. By evening, the saloon was overflowing with soldiers, their laughter carrying across the darkening street. Sarah had closed early, unwilling to deal with uniformed men whose eyes held too much judgment for a woman alone. But as she extinguished her lamps, a sharp knock came at her door. "Trading hours are over," she called. "Official business, Mrs. Blackwood." Sheriff Holloway's voice. "The colonel requests your presence." The meeting room above the saloon was thick with tobacco smoke and male authority. Colonel Westfield sat at the head of a battered table, town elders arrayed to either side like nervous courtiers. Reverend Mills's pinched face registered disapproval when Sarah entered. Mayor Thompson barely acknowledged her with a nod. "Mrs. Blackwood." The colonel didn't rise. "I understand you operate the trading post on the settlement's perimeter." "I do, and I'm told you trade with Indians." Not a question. Sarah straightened her spine. "I trade with anyone offering fair value, Colonel. Apache, Mexican settlers. Commerce knows no borders." A murmur rippled through the assembled men. The colonel's eyes narrowed slightly. "Patriotic sentiment, Mrs. Blackwood, but somewhat misplaced in current circumstances. We have intelligence suggesting hostile Apache activity in this region. Renegade bands preparing for war. The local bands have been peaceful for nearly 2 years, Sarah countered, then wished she hadn't as every eye in the room fixed on her. "You seem remarkably well informed about Indian affairs," Westfield said mildly. "Perhaps you've observed suspicious movements, unusual gatherings, weapons stockpiling." Sarah's heart quickened. Did he suspect something about her meetings with Red Hawk? Nothing beyond normal seasonal hunting parties. The Apache follow game migrations this time of year. Reverend Mills cleared his throat. "Mrs. Blackwood has shown uncommon sympathy toward the savages, Colonel. Her judgment in these matters may be colored by sentimentality." "I prefer first-hand observation to saloon rumors, Reverend," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady. Despite the anger flaring in her chest, Sheriff Holloway shifted uncomfortably. "Sarah, Mrs. Blackwood, has lived here 3 years, runs an honest business. No one questions Mrs. Blackwood's business acumen," the colonel said smoothly. "Merely her awareness of larger concerns. These territories must be secured if civilization is to advance. That requires certain decisive actions." Sarah felt cold suddenly despite the overheated room. What actions would those be, Colonel? Instead of answering, Westfield removed a folded document from his breast pocket and slid it across the table toward the mayor. "Orders from the territorial governor. Authorization for a preemptive security operation against hostile elements threatening settlement interests." The mayor paled as he read. "This authorizes—" "A necessary intervention," Westfield cut him off. "I've trained scouts positioned to locate the main Apache encampment. Once confirmed, we'll move rapidly to neutralize the threat." Neutralize. Such a clean word for what would be wholesale slaughter. Sarah had heard stories of Westfield's interventions in other territories, women and children cut down alongside warriors, entire bands erased as if they'd never existed. "These are peaceful people," she began, but the colonel's raised hand silenced her. "Mrs. Blackwood, your concern for the Indians is noted, but these orders are not subject to civilian debate. I merely inform this council as a courtesy." He turned to the sheriff. "I'll require a local guide familiar with the backcountry, someone who knows the canyons west of Shadow Mesa." As the meeting dispersed, Sarah lingered, watching as the colonel's adjutant gathered the papers left on the table. A sheet fluttered to the floor, unnoticed in the general movement. Sarah waited until the room emptied before retrieving it. Orders, troop deployments, a map marking the planned route into Apache territory, and at the bottom, a date, 2 days hence, at dawn. Her hands trembled as she folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket. 2 days to prevent a massacre. Dawn found Sarah already miles from her trading post, moving through the sage-studded landscape with desperate purpose. She'd left in darkness, slipping out her back door with nothing but a canvas satchel containing hardtack, jerky, and a dented tin canteen of water. The weight of Thomas's field glasses hung around her neck, and the stolen orders were folded small against her skin. The direct route to the Apache camp would take her across open country, too visible to any scouts Westfield might have posted. Instead, she followed game trails through a series of narrow canyons, paths Red Hawk had shown her that wound like a serpent through the red rock. The sun climbed higher, baking the land. Sarah paused in a sliver of shade to drink sparingly from her canteen. Her cotton dress clung to her back, damp with sweat. Proper ladies didn't exert themselves this way, Reverend Mills would say. Proper ladies didn't warn Apache about cavalry. Movements either. Proper ladies be damned, she muttered, recapping the canteen. A sound stopped her, the distinctive rattle that made every desert traveler's blood run cold. Slowly, Sarah turned her head. Not 10 feet away, a rattlesnake lay coiled in a patch of sun, its warning clear. Between her and the only path forward, Red Hawk had taught her about rattlers, not to fear them unnecessarily, but to respect their place. Move slow, he'd said. Even step. No threat. Snake only strikes what threatens. Drawing a steadying breath, Sarah began to edge sideways, placing each foot with deliberate care. The snake's rattle intensified, its head tracking her movement. One slip, one startled motion, and its fangs would find her. Out here alone, a snake bite meant certain death. I honor your place, Brother Snake, she whispered in Apache. I seek only to pass. Whether it was her careful movement or the words themselves, the rattler eventually subsided, slithering away into a crevice. Sarah released the breath she'd been holding and continued on. Midday brought new challenges. The canyons narrowed, then widened into a dry wash. Recent rains upstream had carved the sand into treacherous pockets. Twice she sank to her ankles, the sandy soil giving way beneath her weight. The third time, she lost her boot, forced to dig. Frantically, as the unstable ground shifted, as she tugged the boot back on, Sarah glimpsed movement on the ridge above, a flash of blue against red rock. Cavalry scouts. She froze, pressing herself against the wash wall, heart hammering. If they spotted her now, everything would be lost. Minutes stretched like hours as she waited, barely breathing. Finally, the scout moved on, unaware of her presence. Below, Sarah allowed herself a moment of relief before pushing forward with renewed urgency. By late afternoon, exhaustion clawed at her. The canyons had given way to steep inclines that tested her strength and resolve. Loose shale slid beneath her feet, sending small cascades of stone clattering downward. Each time she paused, listening for pursuit, for discovery. A distant crack echoed through the canyon, a rifle shot. Sarah dropped instinctively, pressing herself to the ground. More shots followed, then silence. Hunting party, army patrol. She couldn't risk finding out, as the sun began its descent toward the western. Mesa's doubt crept in. What if she couldn't find the camp? What if she arrived too late? What if the Apache killed her before she could deliver her warning? The image of Red Hawk's face surfaced in her mind, the quiet intensity of his gaze when he'd explained the star. Patterns. The rare smile that transformed his features when she'd mastered a difficult Apache phrase. And behind that, the memory of the cavalry colonel's cold eyes as he spoke of neutralizing threats. Keep moving, she told herself, pushing up from her brief rest. Just keep moving. The final ridge nearly defeated her. A near-vertical climb of crumbling sandstone, it seemed an impossible barrier. Sarah's hands were scraped raw, her dress torn at the hem. But as the sun touched the horizon, painting the desert in bloody hues, she pulled herself over the edge and saw it. The Apache encampment nestled in a protected valley. Cook fires already, glowing against the gathering dusk, so close. Yet the most dangerous part of her journey still lay ahead. Would they hear her warning, or would her mission end with an Apache arrow in her heart? Sarah's approach to the Apache camp was met with swift, silent reaction. Before she could call out a greeting, 3 warriors materialized from the gathering. Shadow's arrows knocked and aimed at her heart. Their faces were painted with ochre stripes, war preparation. I seek Red Hawk, she said in halting Apache, raising her empty hands. Danger comes. Blue coats come. The warriors exchanged glances, but did not lower their weapons. One barked a command to another, who disappeared back toward the camp. Long minutes passed. Sarah remained absolutely still, aware that the slightest suspicious movement might end with an arrow piercing her chest. Sweat trickled down her spine, despite the evening chill. Finally, familiar footsteps approached. Redhawk emerged from the shadows, his expression a careful mask. No trace of their private connection showed on his face. "Why do you come here, trader woman?" he asked loudly in English, for the benefit of the others. Sarah understood the necessity of the charade. "The army plans to attack your camp at dawn. I have proof." She slowly reached toward her bodice to retrieve the folded orders. One warrior stepped forward threateningly, but Redhawk raised his hand. "Show slowly." Sarah withdrew the paper and held it out. Redhawk took it, examining the military markings with a frown before passing it to an older warrior beside him. "She brings soldier paper," the older man said in Apache. "Could be trap." "I risked my life to bring warning," Sarah replied in their language, surprising them. "Test me. Ask what only a true friend would know." The older warrior's eyes narrowed. "Take her to council. Chief must decide." They bound her wrists loosely, but the message was clear. She was a prisoner, not a guest. Redhawk walked ahead, deliberately distant, though once, when the others weren't looking, he glanced back with a complex emotion in his eyes that Sarah couldn't fully decipher. The council lodge sat at the center of the camp. Women paused in their cooking to stare. As Sarah was led past, children whispered behind their hands. An old grandmother spat on the ground as she passed, a gesture to ward off evil. Inside the lodge, firelight cast dancing shadows on the faces of the tribal elders. Chief Grey Wolf sat cross-legged on a buffalo robe, his face deeply lined with age and wisdom. Beside him sat a wizened man whose piercing eyes seemed to look through Sarah rather than at her. Tall Pine, the medicine man Redhawk had spoken of with such respect. "Untie her," Grey Wolf commanded in Apache. "One who comes alone to enemy camp either brings truth or seeks death." As the bindings fell away, Sarah rubbed her wrists, gathering her courage. "I bring both truth and warning, Chief of the Shadow. Mesa people, the Blue Coat Chief called Westfield plans to attack your camp when the sun rises 2 days from now. I have seen his maps and read his orders." A murmur ran through the gathered men. Grey Wolf raised a ceremonial staff, the talking stick that gave the holder the right to speak, and silence fell immediately. "Why would a white woman betray her own kind?" he asked. "What do you gain from this?" Before Sarah could answer, Tall Pine spoke for the first time, his voice like dry leaves rustling. "The question is not what she gains, but what she has already lost." His eyes fixed on Sarah with unsettling intensity. "This one stands between worlds already. I see it in her spirit fire." Redhawk stepped forward, carefully respectful. "My chief, I have traded with this woman many times. She deals fairly with our people, speaks some of our words. If she says soldiers come, I believe we should at least send scouts to verify." Grey Wolf considered, his expression unreadable. "And if it is a trap? If she leads our scouts into ambush?" "Then I will accept the punishment," Redhawk said quietly. "My life for theirs." Sarah's heart clenched at the offer. "I will stay here," she said quickly. "Keep me as hostage while your scouts check my warning. If I lie, my life is forfeit." Another elder spoke up sharply. "We do not need her permission to keep her here. She is already our prisoner." Grey Wolf raised his hand for silence, studying Sarah with ancient, knowing eyes. Finally, he nodded once. "Send 3 scouts to the canyon approach. Fast runners, good eyes. The woman stays under guard." He pointed the talking stick at Redhawk. "Not yours. You are too familiar with her ways already." As Sarah was led from the council lodge, she caught a glimpse of Tall Pine still watching her, his expression both troubled and curious. She had delivered her warning, but whether it would be heeded, and what price she would ultimately pay for her choice, remained to be seen. They gave Sarah a small hide shelter at the camp's edge, positioned where escape would be impossible without detection. Two young warriors took turns guarding her, their expressions impassive, refusing to respond to her attempts at conversation. In either English or broken Apache, as night deepened, the camp transformed. Women moved with quiet efficiency, packing essential belongings, dismantling lodges. Children were gathered, their questions hushed by mothers with worried eyes. Sarah watched through the open flap of her shelter, understanding the gravity of what she had set in motion. Near midnight, drumming began, a low, steady rhythm that seemed to pulse with the earth itself. Voices joined in song, rising and falling in patterns Sarah couldn't comprehend, but felt in her bones nonetheless. "War preparations," a voice said from the darkness. Sarah turned to find a young woman standing just outside her shelter, a water skin in her hands. She had Red Hawk's high cheekbones and direct gaze, his sister, Morning Star, whom he had described but Sarah had never met. "They prepare to fight or to flee?" Sarah asked, accepting the water gratefully. Morning Star's expression remained guarded. "My brother says you are friend to our people. Others say you bring death." "I bring warning of death," Sarah corrected. "I don't want blood spilled, yours or theirs." The young woman studied her curiously. Why? Such a simple question, with such a complicated answer. Sarah took a careful sip of water before responding. "Because I've seen enough killing. Because your people have as much right to live in peace as mine. Because—" She hesitated. "Because of my brother," Morning Star finished for her, something knowing in her eyes. Sarah didn't confirm or deny, but her silence was answer enough. Morning Star nodded once, then gestured toward the center of the camp where men were gathering. "The hunters and warriors prepare," she explained. "They mix the sacred paint, speak to their spirit guides, strengthen their medicine." Sarah caught glimpses of men applying red and black clay to their faces and chests, in patterns that transformed them from individuals into something other, vessels of ancient power. The paint was more than decoration, it was armor of a different kind, protection against both physical and spiritual enemies. "And the women and children?" Sarah asked. "Will move to the hidden canyon before dawn. Only warriors remain to face the blue coats." Morning Star's voice hardened. "If your warning is false, they will die for nothing." Before Sarah could respond, commotion erupted at the camp's perimeter. The scouts had returned, moving swiftly toward the chief's lodge. Moments later, Red Hawk appeared at Sarah's shelter, his face already bearing the first markings of war paint. "The scouts confirmed," he said without preamble. "Soldiers camp 3 hours' ride from here. Many men, many guns." He glanced at his sister, who stepped away to give them a moment of privacy. "You told truth, Sarah Blackwood." Relief flooded her. "Then you'll move the camp, get everyone to safety?" "Women, children, elders go to Sacred Canyon. Warriors stay, fight." His expression was resolute. "We cannot always run. Sometimes we must stand." "They outnumber you," Sarah argued. "They have better weapons. We have better knowledge of land, better reasons to fight." He crouched to her, level, voice lowering. "Chief Grey Wolf asks for your help. You know soldier ways, how they think, how they move." She hadn't expected this, to be asked not just to warn but to actively assist. The implications were staggering. This would be treason by any definition. "If I help you, I can never go back," she said quietly. Red Hawk's dark eyes held hers. "You crossed that river when you first climbed Ridge to warn us." He was right, of course. She had made her choice the moment she'd stolen those orders. Whatever life she'd had in the White World was already forfeit. "The cavalry will come up the main canyon," she said, decision made. "It's the only approach wide enough for horses at speed. Colonel Westfield favors overwhelming force, a direct charge to terrify his enemy." Red Hawk nodded. "Then we do not meet him there. We choose different ground." He helped her to her feet, no longer a prisoner but an ally. As they walked toward the chief's lodge, Sarah saw Tall Pine watching from beside the council fire, his ancient eyes reflecting flames as he nodded once in what might have been approval. By first light, the Apache camp had vanished. Women, children, and elders disappeared into the maze of canyons with practiced efficiency, leaving no trace of their passage. Only the warriors remained, 40 strong, their faces transformed by sacred patterns of clay into masks of ancestral power. And among them, her face streaked with a single line of red ochre, stood Sarah Blackwood, no longer merely a messenger, but a participant in the battle to come. Dawn broke in ribbons of flame across the eastern sky. Sarah crouched beside Red Hawk, behind a jumble of boulders overlooking the narrow pass where they had decided to meet the cavalry. Her hands, grimy with dust and sweat, clutched Thomas's field glasses. Below, the canyon floor remained empty, though for how much longer she couldn't say. The Apache warriors were positioned with careful strategy, some hidden among the rocks above the canyon, others behind natural barriers along its floor. Their plan, formed with Sarah's knowledge of cavalry tactics and the Apache understanding of the land, was simple but effective. Let the soldiers enter the narrowest section of the canyon, then block both exits. "They will come soon," Red Hawk said softly. "Sun touches red rock." As if summoned by his words, a distant bugle call echoed through the morning air. Sarah raised the field glasses, focusing on the canyon's western mouth. Dust rose first, then the glint of metal, rifle barrels and brass buttons catching the early light. "They're coming," she whispered unnecessarily. "At least 30 men." Beside her, Red Hawk remained utterly still, only his eyes moving as he tracked the approaching column. The warriors hidden around them were similarly motionless, living extensions of the stone and scrub. Colonel Westfield rode at the column's head, straight-backed and confident. Sarah wondered if he'd discovered her absence yet, if he'd connected it to the missing orders. Too late now if he had. The cavalry moved into the canyon at a trot, hooves clattering on stone, bridle bits jingling. They rode in tight formation, carbines ready across their saddles. Westfield raised his hand, signaling a halt as they reached the canyon's midpoint. Something had alerted him. A warrior's movement, perhaps, or simply the prickling sense of danger that veteran soldiers developed. For a breathless moment, the tableau held, blue-coated men frozen in the morning light, Apache warriors poised like hunting falcons above them. Then Grey Wolf's war cry shattered the silence, echoing from the canyon walls. The battle erupted with shocking violence. Apache arrows rained down from the ridges, followed by the crack of rifles, both cavalry carbines and the few firearms the Apache possessed. Horses reared and screamed. Men shouted orders that were swallowed by the canyon's acoustic chaos. Sarah watched in horror and fascination as the careful plan unfolded. Warriors rolled boulders down the steep slopes, blocking the cavalry's retreat. Others emerged from hiding places, engaging soldiers in close combat. The air filled with dust and gun smoke obscuring her view. A group of soldiers broke from the main force, spurring their horses toward a narrow side ravine, an escape route they'd spotted. Red Hawk tensed. Beside her, "That path leads to women and children," he said grimly, already rising to his feet. "I must stop them." "I'm coming with you," Sarah said, abandoning the field glasses and drawing the knife she'd been given. They scrambled down the rocky slope, taking a hunter's trail that paralleled the ravine. Sarah's skirts caught on thorny brush, her boots slipping. On loose shale, Red Hawk moved ahead with sure-footed grace, pausing only to ensure she followed safely. They reached the ravine floor just as the soldiers rounded a bend. 5 men, led by a young lieutenant with blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. They pulled up short at the sight of Red Hawk and Sarah, confusion written clearly on their dust-streaked faces. "Mrs. Blackwood," the lieutenant said incredulously. "What in God's name?" "Lieutenant Davis," she acknowledged, recognizing one of the younger officers from the settlement. "Turn back. This path leads nowhere." His expression hardened as understanding dawned. "You're with them. A traitor." "I'm trying to prevent a massacre," she countered. "There are women and children beyond this ravine." "Savages," one of the other soldiers spat. "They've bewitched her, sir." Red Hawk stood silent beside her, his bow half drawn, watching for the slightest aggressive movement. The impasse might have held, but for the bugle call that suddenly echoed through the canyon. Retreat. The lieutenant's head turned instinctively toward the sound, and in that moment of distraction, Red Hawk loosed his arrow, striking the man's shoulder. Chaos erupted. Horses reared. A soldier fired his carbine, the shot going wide. Sarah found herself pulled behind a boulder by Red Hawk as bullets struck stone around them. Then answering fire came from behind, more Apache warriors arriving to defend the path. The skirmish ended as quickly as it had begun. The soldiers, outflanked and hearing the continued retreat call, wheeled their horses and galloped back toward the main canyon, leaving their wounded lieutenant behind. As the dust settled, Sarah emerged from cover to find Red Hawk kneeling beside the wounded officer. Rather than finishing him, the Apache was binding the man's shoulder with a strip of cloth. "He is young," Red Hawk said simply. "Today, not his day to join ancestors." Throughout the canyon, the sounds of battle were fading. The cavalry bugle continued, its call to retreat growing more distant by the moment. Sarah retrieved a fallen cavalry bugle from the dust, its brass dented but still intact, a symbol of the day's unexpected victory. "It's over?" she asked, hardly daring to believe it. Red Hawk nodded once. "For today. They will return with more soldiers, more guns. But not today," she said, relief washing through her. "Today the people are safe." The Apache camp resettled in the sacred canyon by nightfall, a place of towering walls and hidden springs known only to the tribe. Sarah sat apart, watching as families reunited. Warriors received healing herbs for their wounds, and the dead were prepared for burial rites. Her own dress was torn and filthy, stained with dust and blood, some hers, some not, a visible symbol of her transformation. 3 warriors had fallen in the battle. Their bodies lay wrapped in deerskin, faces painted for the journey to the spirit world. The Apache mourned with dignity, women keening soft songs that raised gooseflesh on Sarah's arms, men standing in solemn witness. No hysterics, no collapse of control like she'd seen at white funerals, just profound, contained grief that honored the dead without diminishing the living. "You helped save many lives today," Morning Star said, settling beside Sarah and offering a wooden bowl of stew. "My brother says, without your warning, many more would have joined the ancestors." Sarah accepted the food with murmured thanks, though her appetite had fled hours ago. "I'm sorry for those who were lost." Morning Star nodded, her eyes tracking to where the wrapped bodies lay. "They died as warriors, protecting the people. Their spirits will ride the wind and watch over us." She studied Sarah's face carefully. "What will you do now, woman between worlds? You cannot return to your trading post." The question hit Sarah with physical force. In the desperate rush to warn the Apache, she'd given little thought to what would come after. Now reality settled like a stone in her stomach. "I am a traitor to my people," she said softly. "If I return, they would hang me." "You chose a side," Morningstar corrected, "just not the one you were born to." Across the camp, Sarah could see Red Hawk in discussion with Chief Grey Wolf and other tribal leaders. Their gestures suggested serious debate. About her, she realized. About what to do with the white woman who had betrayed her own kind. A shadow fell across them. Tall Pine, the medicine man, stood looking down at Sarah with those unnervingly direct eyes. Without speaking, he gestured for her to follow him. Morningstar's expression grew serious. "You should go." It is rare for Tall Pine to summon anyone. Directly, the medicine man led Sarah to a small cave set apart from the main encampment. Inside, a small fire burned, its smoke rising through a natural chimney in the rock. He motioned for her to sit across from him, the flames between them. casting shifting shadows on his deeply lined face. "Your spirit is troubled," he said in surprisingly clear English. "Pulled between worlds." Sarah nodded, not bothering to ask how he knew. "I can never go back to my people, but I'm not Apache either. Perhaps you are neither. Perhaps you are both." Tall Pine's gnarled hands passed through the smoke, shaping it like clay. "I have seen ones like you before. Bridge people. Rare souls who stand in the space between, allowing others to cross." "The tribe won't accept me," Sarah said. "Why should they? I'm still white. The color of your skin matters less than the color of your spirit." Tall Pine fixed her with that penetrating gaze. "Last night I dreamed of you. In my dream you stood by a fire, but it was not an ordinary fire. It was the vision fire, the sacred flame that guides our people through darkness." Sarah frowned, not understanding. "What does that mean?" Instead of answering directly, Tall Pine reached into a pouch at his waist and sprinkled something onto the flames. They leaped up, suddenly burning blue and green. "The council debates your fate even now," he said. "Some say you should be sent away with food and water, enough to reach the Mexican settlements in the south. Others say you have earned the right to stay, but as a servant, to work and prove yourself further." "And what do you say?" Sarah asked, mesmerized by the dancing flames. "I say neither path follows the vision I was given." Tall Pine's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. "I see another way, but it requires great courage. From you, from the people, from my apprentice who looks at you with more than trading in his eyes." "Red Hawk." Sarah's heart quickened. Before she could respond, commotion erupted outside. A young warrior burst into the cave entrance, breathless. "A rider comes, a white woman on a tired horse. She asks for the trader woman by name." Martha Cleary arrived in the Apache camp like a whirlwind of calico and desperation, her normally neat hair escaping its pins, her face streaked with tears and dust. She dismounted shakily, eyes darting fearfully at the warriors surrounding her, until she spotted Sarah emerging from Tall Pine's cave. "Sarah, thank God!" Martha stumbled forward, heedless of the weapons pointed her way. "You must flee. Westfield has declared you a traitor. There's a bounty on your head, dead or alive." Martha's warning changed everything. With a price on her head, Sarah's tenuous position between worlds solidified into something more definite. The Apache Council, after hearing Martha's report of Westfield's fury and the settlements divided, reaction, granted Sarah sanctuary. Temporary, conditional, but sanctuary nonetheless. Martha returned to Copper Springs the following day, carrying messages to the few settlers Sarah still trusted. "I'll save what I can from your trading post," she promised tearfully at parting. "Books, personal things, before they confiscate everything." The weeks that followed immersed Sarah in Apache life more deeply than she could have imagined. Morning. Star became her teacher and reluctant friend, showing her women's work that kept the tribe alive. How to grind mesquite beans into flour, how to weave watertight baskets, how to prepare hides for lodge coverings. "Your hands are soft," Morning Star observed critically, watching Sarah struggle with a bone scraper against a deer hide. "Too many years holding paper and pens." "They'll toughen," Sarah replied, grimacing as another blister formed on her palm. She refused to complain. Every skill she mastered brought her one step closer to acceptance. The tribe's women watched her with varying degrees of curiosity, suspicion, or amusement. Some, like the elder Two Moons, made a point of correcting her technique with sharp words and sharper pokes. Others, particularly the younger ones, giggled behind their hands at her mistakes, but showed genuine pleasure when she improved. Red Hawk remained distant in public. His position as future medicine man and nephew to the chief required careful adherence to propriety. But sometimes at dusk he would find her at the edge of camp, ostensibly to ensure she understood some aspect of tribal protocol, and they would talk of deeper things. "Your world measures progress by what is built, what is changed," he said once, as they watched the sunset paint the canyon walls. "My people measure by what is preserved, what continues. Both have wisdom, both have blindness. Sarah thought about this as she worked alongside Two Moons one afternoon, learning to shape a clay pot, using techniques unchanged for 1,000 years. The old woman's gnarled fingers moved with practiced certainty, coaxing the wet clay into perfect curves. Not so thin there, Two Moons corrected in Apache, tapping the rim of Sarah's lopsided attempt. We'll crack in fire. Start again. Sighing, Sarah crushed her pot back into a formless lump. It was her third attempt that day. She caught a flicker of something, approval, in the elder's eyes, at her willingness to begin anew without complaint. Clay remembers hands that shape it, Two Moons said unexpectedly. Good pot comes from hands that listen to clay, not just command it. The simple wisdom struck Sarah profoundly. How much of her life had she spent trying to command circumstances rather than listening to them? Even her trading post, forcing commerce into the wilderness, imposing eastern goods on western landscapes. That evening, Tall Pine summoned her again. The medicine man had been observing her integration into tribal life, with those unsettling eyes that seemed to see beneath skin to bone, beneath words to meaning. Your dreams, he said without preamble, they are changing. It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded anyway, unsettled by his perception. Her nights had indeed filled with vivid images, flames that spoke in women's voices, canyons that breathed like living creatures, stars that rearranged themselves into patterns she almost understood. Upon waking, the spirits test you, Tall Pine continued. They show you pieces of a path. You must learn to see with more than eyes. He instructed her to keep a dream bundle, a small leather pouch in which she placed items connected to significant dreams. A hawk feather, a piece of red stone, a juniper seed. These will help you remember, he explained. Dreams fade like morning mist unless captured. Sarah's days fell into rhythm with tribal life. She rose with the sun, worked until her muscles ached, learned words and ways that slowly reshaped her. Understanding of the world. The strangeness gradually gave way to familiarity, then to a deepening sense of rightness. One afternoon, as she dipped water from the spring, Sarah caught her reflection in the still pool. A woman she barely recognized. Sun had darkened her skin, wind had loosened her hair from its pins, and work had strengthened her once soft hands. The calico dress Martha had brought from her trading post hung in tatters, patched with deerskin and sinew. You look more Apache. Every day, Morning Star commented, appearing beside her at the spring. Inside too, I think. She hesitated, then added, My brother watches you, even when he pretends not to. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. He is my friend. He helps me. Understand your ways. Morningstar's mouth curved in the barest smile. Is that what they call it in the white world? Understanding? She splashed water playfully at Sarah. Come, tonight is the blessing of the corn. You will help prepare the sacred meal. It was the first ritual Sarah had been invited to participate in rather than merely observe. A small, but significant acceptance. As she followed Morning Star back to camp, Sarah realized with sudden clarity that she no longer thought constantly of returning to her old life. Somewhere, in these weeks of labor and learning, of dream bundles and clay, pots, her spirit had begun to find a new home. The announcement came at the end of the corn blessing ceremony, when the tribe sat in contented circles around the communal fires. Tall Pine rose with ceremonial slowness, his medicine staff tapping the earth 3 times for attention. Conversations hushed as all eyes turned to the aged shaman. The spirit guides have spoken, he declared, voice carrying surprising strength. The woman who stands between worlds must seek her true name. 4 days hence, she will undertake the vision quest. A murmur rippled through the gathering. Vision quests were sacred rites, typically reserved for Apache youth transitioning to adulthood or warriors seeking spiritual guidance. Never had an outsider been called to this most intimate of tribal ceremonies. Sarah felt the weight of stares upon her, some curious, others openly disapproving. Across the fire, Red Hawk's expression remained carefully neutral, though she detected a flicker of concern in his eyes. Later, as the gathering dispersed, he found her collecting her few belongings from beside the women's fire. "Do you understand? What has been asked of you?" he said quietly, keeping a proper distance. "I'm to go alone into the wilderness and seek a vision?" Sarah's voice betrayed her uncertainty. "It is more than that." Red Hawk glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "You will fast for 4 days and nights. No food, only enough water to sustain life. You will be placed at a sacred site marked by 4 stones. Within that boundary, you must remain until the vision comes, no matter what you face. Fear, pain, thirst, doubt." Sarah swallowed hard. "And if no vision comes? Then you return with empty hands, and your place among us remains uncertain." His expression softened slightly. "But Tall Pine would not have called for this if he did not already see something in your spirit." The days of preparation passed. With dreamlike swiftness, Sarah was taught purification rituals, smoking with sacred herbs, washing in spring water at dawn and dusk, abstaining from certain foods to cleanse her body. Morningstar helped her prepare a small bundle of personal items she would carry: her husband's locket, a fragment of her first clay pot, the hawk feather from her dream bundle. On the 4th morning, before dawn, Tall Pine came for her. Red Hawk accompanied them, along with 2 other warriors who would witness the beginning of her quest. They traveled in silence as the eastern sky lightened, climbing a steep trail that wound up the canyon wall to a high plateau overlooking the desert. There, on a flat expanse of stone, 4 painted rocks had been arranged in a square, perhaps 6 feet on each side. Inside this boundary lay only bare rock, exposed to sun, wind, and sky. "This is the place," Tall Pine said. "The 4 stones mark the boundaries of your world for the coming days. Do not cross them until your vision is complete, or until I return for you when the 4th sun sets." The old medicine man shuffled forward, pressing a leather water pouch into her hands. "Drink sparingly, listen deeply. Remember that what eyes see is not always what spirit knows." With that cryptic advice, he stepped back. The warriors withdrew a respectful distance, leaving Sarah alone to enter the sacred space. The ground was hard and unyielding beneath her feet. Already the rising sun promised merciless heat to come. As the Apache departed, Red Hawk turned back briefly. Their eyes met across the distance, and he touched his hand to his heart in a gesture, so subtle the others didn't notice. Then he was gone, and Sarah faced her first day alone with the vast sky and her own tumultuous thoughts. The heat came as expected, beating down without relief as the sun tracked across the cloudless sky. By midday, Sarah's lips had cracked, despite careful sips from her water skin. By evening, her head pounded with the beginnings of dehydration and hunger. She watched the sunset paint the western horizon in impossible colors, shivering as the desert's heat dissipated with shocking speed. Night brought new challenges. Creatures rustled in the sparse vegetation beyond her stone boundary. Strange calls echoed across the plateau. Coyote, owl, voices she couldn't name. The stars emerged, in overwhelming profusion, more brilliant than she'd ever seen them. Sarah huddled in her thin blanket, fighting the primitive fear of darkness, of exposure, of absolute solitude. Sleep came in fitful bursts, broken by dreams more vivid than waking. She saw Thomas standing at the trading post door, beckoning her. Home, his face shifting subtly until he wore Red Hawk's features instead. She dreamed of fire, not destructive, but nurturing, a flame that spoke with a woman's voice, though she couldn't understand the words. Dawn brought temporary relief, until the sun climbed higher and the heat cycle began anew. Sarah's thoughts grew disconnected, past and present blurred. She found herself speaking aloud to people not there: her father, Thomas, Morningstar, faces from her childhood in Boston. The boundary between memory and imagination dissolved like mist. By the third day, physical discomfort had transcended into something different, a heightened awareness despite her body's weakness. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds more distinct. The line between her skin and the air grew less defined. She found herself breathing in rhythm with the whisper of wind across stone. That night, as the half-moon rose, something shifted within and around her. The painted boundary stones began to glow with soft internal light. The stars pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Sarah felt herself expanding, becoming vast as the desert itself, then contracting to a single point of consciousness, then expanding again, and finally the vision came. Sarah's return from her vision quest transformed her standing in the tribe. Though she spoke little of what she had seen, sharing the full vision only with Tall Pine in the privacy of his medicine lodge, the change in her was evident to all. She moved with new purpose, her gaze clearer, her presence somehow more substantial. The spirits have touched her, the women whispered among themselves as Sarah joined their work circles. Even those who had been most suspicious now acknowledged her with respectful nods. Red Hawk, though still maintaining appropriate distance in public, found more frequent reasons to seek her counsel. Their conversations, once focused on practical matters of tribal customs, now ventured into deeper territories: philosophy, spirituality, the nature of existence itself. The peaceful rhythm of this new life shattered 2 weeks after her vision quest. A hunting party returned to camp at full gallop, their horses lathered and wild-eyed. Among them was Red Hawk, blood soaking his left arm, where an arrow had grazed him. The camp erupted in controlled chaos as warriors gathered their weapons and women prepared to evacuate if necessary. Sarah followed Morning Star to the council lodge, where Red Hawk was reporting to Chief Grey Wolf. "Settlers," he was saying as they entered. "They attacked without warning near the North Canyon, shot running deer from ambush. When we pursued, more fired from the ridgeline." "Soldiers?" Grey Wolf asked, his weathered face grim. "No, not bluecoats. These wore settler clothes, but they fought differently." Red Hawk winced as the medicine man's assistant applied a poultice to his wound. Their arrows were strange. From a deerskin pouch, he produced a broken arrow shaft. Sarah moved closer, drawn by something familiar in its construction. The fletching was turkey feather, dyed blue, not the eagle feathers the Apache used. And the arrowhead. "This is a metal tip," she said, taking the arrow with sudden urgency. "Machine cut from a trading post or general store. But the shaft is Apache style." Grey Wolf's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying, woman between worlds?" "I'm saying this arrow was made to look Apache, but no Apache made it." Sarah turned the shaft, showing the distinctive copper band near the fletching. "This is a white man's arrow disguised to blame your people." The implication settled heavily over the council lodge. If settlers were staging attacks to appear as though the Apache were responsible, it could justify military action against the tribe. Exactly the scenario Sarah had warned them about months earlier with Westfield. "We must learn more," Grey Wolf decided. "Send scouts to watch the settlement. Perhaps this is the work of a few bad men, not all whites." For 3 days, the tribe existed in wary readiness. Hunting parties traveled in larger groups, armed for war rather than game. Children were kept close to camp. At night, extra sentries watched from the canyon ridges. On the 4th day, a scout returned with news that froze Sarah's blood. "A woman from the settlement approaches, the one who came before." Martha Cleary arrived with haunted eyes and trembling hands. When she saw Sarah, she nearly collapsed with relief. "Thank God you're alive," Martha gasped. They told everyone you were dead." "Who said?" Sarah demanded, supporting her friend to a seat by the women's fire. "Colonel Westfield. He returned last week with new troops and mercenaries. He's been telling terrible stories, that the Apache tortured and killed you, that they're planning a massive uprising." Martha accepted a water skin with shaking hands. "Most folks don't believe it, especially after how he left you to face charges alone. but he's been recruiting men who don't know you, outsiders with grudges against Indians. Sarah felt cold despite the afternoon heat. Has there been trouble? Martha's face crumpled. 3 homesteads burned 2 nights ago. Everyone says Apache raiders did it, but... She pulled a folded paper from her bodice. I found this in the sheriff's office. Holloway was drunk, complaining about soldiers taking over his jail. When he passed out, I took the chance to look through his papers. The document was a military order, authorizing Colonel Westfield to pacify hostile elements through any means necessary. Attached was a hand-drawn map showing both the settlement and suspected Apache camp locations. There's more, Martha said, voice dropping to a whisper. They've hired men, killers, to dress as Apache and raid isolated farms, building support for a full military campaign. And Sarah... She gripped her friend's wrist. They're planning to attack both the settlement and the Apache camps. Westfield means to eliminate any witnesses to what he's doing. A commotion from the camp's edge interrupted them. Warriors were gathering, weapons ready, facing the approaching figures of Red Hawk and 2 companions. Between them, they half-carried, half-dragged a wounded man in settler's clothing. Found him watching the South Pass, Red Hawk announced. He carries this. He held up a leather message pouch. Inside was a letter bearing Colonel Westfield's seal, addressed to a Captain Richards at Fort Defiance. Sarah scanned it quickly. Her worst fears confirmed with each line. He's requesting reinforcements, she told the gathering tribal leaders. Says the Apache have formed an alliance with renegade Mexicans and are planning coordinated attacks on all settlements in the territory. Lies, spat an elder warrior. We seek only peace in our ancestral lands. Westfield doesn't want peace, Sarah said grimly. He wants land and glory and an excuse to eliminate the Apache once and for all. Chief Grey Wolf studied her with ancient, knowing eyes. And you, woman between worlds, where do you stand now that your own people threaten both our lives? Before she could answer, the wounded settler raised his head weakly. She stands with the savages, he croaked. Everyone knows she betrayed her race. Westfield's offering $50 to whoever brings in her head. The camp fell silent, all eyes turning to Sarah. She felt the fragile trust she'd built over months suddenly balanced on a knife's edge. Perhaps, said a voice from the crowd, she was their spy all along. They bound Sarah's hands once more and placed her under guard in a small hide lodge at the camp's edge. Martha was similarly confined, though treated with more courtesy, as she had come voluntarily with warning. The wounded settler was tended. 2. Apache did not let even enemies die unnecessarily, but kept under heavy watch. Sarah sat cross-legged on a buffalo robe, trying to still her racing thoughts. Outside, she could hear the murmur of council debate, her fate being decided by men who now questioned everything about her presence among them. I told you this would happen, Morningstar said softly, entering with a water skin. Though not officially a guard, she had appointed herself Sarah's visitor. Caught between worlds is a dangerous place to stand. I'm not a spy, Sarah said, accepting a drink with bound hands. I've never betrayed the tribe. I believe you. Morningstar's admission surprised them both. But belief is not proof, and the council needs proof with such danger approaching. She hesitated, then added, My brother speaks for you. But even his voice carries less weight when his heart is involved, so it was known then, the feelings between her and Red Hawk. Sarah wondered how many others had seen what they had tried to hide. What will happen to me? If the council cannot agree, you will be sent away, given a horse, water and food enough to reach the Mexican settlements. Morningstar's expression softened slightly. It is not a death sentence, but the desert is dangerous for a woman alone. And Westfield's men are hunting me, Sarah added grimly. I wouldn't last 3 days. As evening shadows lengthened, Tall Pine shuffled into the lodge, dismissing the guards with imperious wave of his medicine staff. His ancient face revealed nothing, as he settled across from Sarah, lighting a small bundle of sacred herbs that filled the space with pungent smoke. "In your vision," he said without preamble, "you saw the fire that speaks with woman's voice." Sarah nodded, surprised. She had shared this detail only with him, after her return from the vision quest. "That fire shows truth," he continued. "It burns away masks, reveals what lies beneath." His eyes, roomy with age but sharp with intelligence, fixed on hers. "If you are true to that vision, you must find proof that will convince even those who wish not to believe." "How?" Sarah asked. "I'm a prisoner. Are you?" Tall Pine's expression remained impassive. "I see no guards now." Understanding dawned. Slowly. "You're suggesting I escape?" "I suggest nothing. I speak of visions and fires." The old medicine man rose with surprising agility. "I go now to prepare night ceremony. It will keep all eyes turned to the center of camp for many hours." With that cryptic statement he departed, leaving the lodge flap untied behind him. As darkness fell completely, drumbeats began from the main council fire. Sarah sat motionless, considering Tall Pine's veiled message. To flee now would confirm every suspicion against her. Yet to remain passive meant accepting whatever judgment the council decreed. A shadow darkened the doorway. Morning Star slipped inside, a knife gleaming in her hand. "My brother would kill me if he knew I was doing this," she whispered, sawing through the rawhide binding Sarah's wrists. "But the Old One is right. We need proof, and you are the only one who can get it." "You're helping me escape?" Sarah rubbed her chafed wrists in disbelief. "Not escape. Return." Morning Star handed her a small bundle, moccasins, a water skin, and a knife. "You know the white man's ways. Go to your trading post, find whatever. We'll prove Westfield's treachery, then come back before dawn. If I'm caught, then we both die." Morning Star's bluntness was strangely comforting. "But if you are truly woman between worlds, as Tall Pine names you, then perhaps you are the bridge we need in this time of breaking." The night cloaked Sarah's movement as she slipped from the lodge and made her way to the canyon's edge. The tribal ceremony created perfect cover, all attention focused on the rhythmic drums and chanting voices. Even the sentries had moved closer to watch the sacred dances. The journey to her trading post took less than 2 hours at a steady trot. Sarah moved with newfound confidence through the desert darkness, her body stronger now from months of Apache living. She approached the familiar building with caution, relieved to find it dark and apparently abandoned. The door's lock had been broken long ago. Inside, the trading post stood in disarray. Shelves emptied, counter smashed, her personal belongings scattered. Sarah lit a small lamp, keeping the flame low as she searched for anything that might help her case. In her small back room, she found her journal still hidden in the loose floorboard beneath her bed, overlooked by whoever had ransacked the place. The leather-bound book contained her meticulous records of trading transactions, but also her private observations about settlement politics, military movements, and suspicions about Westfield's true agenda. She was replacing the floorboard when a sound froze her in place. Bootsteps on the porch. The door creaked open. "I thought you might come back here eventually," Sheriff Holloway's voice drawled from the doorway. "Didn't expect it to be quite so soon." Sarah straightened slowly, the journal clutched to her chest, facing the barrel of Holloway's revolver. "You planning to shoot me, Sheriff?" she asked, surprised at the steadiness of her own voice. Holloway stepped into the lamplight, his face haggard with strain. "That depends on why you came back, Sarah. If you're working with Westfield now—" "Westfield?" Sarah's confusion was genuine. "He's offering a bounty for my head." The sheriff lowered his gun slightly. "Is he now?" "Interesting, since he told me special agents were bringing you back to help identify Apache camps." He gestured toward the journal. "What's that you're holding so tight?" "Evidence," Sarah said, making a swift decision, "of Westfield's real plan. He's playing both sides, Sheriff, creating a war where there doesn't need to be one." Holloway holstered his weapon with a weary sigh. I was afraid of that. Damn fool military men always thinking with their sabers instead of their heads. He rubbed his stubbled jaw. You better show me what you've got, quick. Westfield's men patrol the area hourly these days. Sarah returned to the Apache camp as false dawn lightened the eastern sky, Sheriff Holloway riding beside her. Their approach caused immediate alarm. Warriors materialized from the shadows, arrows nocked and aimed. Red Hawk stepped forward, his face a mask of conflicted emotions at seeing Sarah returned with a white lawman. I bring no threat, Sarah called out in Apache. I bring truth and an ally who would speak with Chief Grey Wolf. Tall Pine appeared from his lodge, as if he'd been waiting for this precise moment. With a commanding gesture, he ordered the warriors to lower their weapons. Bring them, he rasped. The council fire still burns. The tribal elders had indeed remained in session through the night, debating Sarah's fate and the tribe's response to the mounting threat. They received Sheriff Holloway with wary dignity, offering him a place at the fire as courtesy demanded, even toward potential enemies. Sarah placed her journal and the documents Holloway had provided in the center of the circle. These prove Westfield's treachery, she explained, switching between Apache and English so all could understand. The sheriff has confirmed what we suspected. The colonel is orchestrating attacks on both settlers and Apache, planning to blame each side for the other's suffering. Holloway cleared his throat nervously, clearly uncomfortable as the only white man in a circle of Apache leaders. Westfield's been pushing for a major campaign against all tribes in the territory for years, he explained. Headquarters keeps turning him down. Too expensive, too politically complicated. So he's creating the crisis he needs to get what he wants. Why would you betray one of your own? Asked an elder warrior skeptically. White men protect white men. I've been sheriff in these parts for 15 years, Holloway replied. Built something stable here. I don't cotton to seeing good people, white or Apache, killed for one man's ambition. Grey Wolf studied the documents with the chief's careful consideration. Though he couldn't read the English words, the maps were clear enough, marking both settlement targets and Apache camps, with dates and troop movements carefully notated. How many settlers will stand with you against this blue coat chief? Asked Holloway directly. Not many, the sheriff admitted. He's got most folks scared with his talk of Apache uprisings. But there are some, the Millers, old Thompson, the Cleary family, who've traded peacefully with your people for years. They'll listen if I can show them proof. Then we face enemies on all sides, Grey Wolf concluded grimly. Not all sides, Sarah interjected, but we must act quickly before Westfield realizes we've discovered his plan. Through the remainder of that day and into the next, an extraordinary council took place. Sheriff Holloway rode back to gather those settlers he trusted most, while Sarah and Red Hawk worked to convince the more skeptical tribal elders that alliance with any whites was possible. Tall Pine supported their efforts with his considerable spiritual authority, describing omens and signs that pointed toward cooperation. By sunset of the second day, an unprecedented gathering assembled at neutral ground, a meadow halfway between the settlement and the Apache camp. 3 settler families arrived with Sheriff Holloway, the Clearys with Martha prominent among them, the Millers whose oldest son had married an Apache woman years before, and grizzled old Thompson, who had trapped and traded in these territories since before the Mexican War. Chief Grey Wolf came with a small delegation of tribal leaders, including Red Hawk and, surprisingly, Morning Star, her presence a statement that this meeting concerned the future of all the people, not just the warriors. Never thought I'd see the day, old Thompson muttered as the two groups faced each other across a hastily constructed council fire. Apache and settlers parleying like civilized folk. We are all civilized in our own ways, Red Hawk replied, with careful dignity. Today, we must find a path that preserves both our peoples. The negotiations were tense at first, decades of mistrust creating barriers that words alone couldn't easily dismantle. Sarah found herself in the crucial role of translator and mediator, moving between groups, clarifying intentions, smoothing misunderstandings. "Tell them we can provide safe passage for their women and children to the high canyon country," Miller offered. "My Maria's kin would shelter them. Explain that we need their scouts to help us identify which of Westfield's men are disguised as Apache," Holloway added. "Can't arrest a man without knowing who he is." As night deepened, the outline of a plan emerged. The Apache would help evacuate vulnerable settler families to safer locations, while trusted settlers would spread word of Westfield's deception among those who might listen. A joint force would intercept the mercenaries before they could stage their next false flag attack. The final element came at Tall Pine's suggestion: a formal peace ceremony to bind their alliance. From his medicine pouch, he produced a pipe of ancient design, its stone bowl carved with symbols whose meaning predated memory. "This pipe has not been shared with white men in 7 generations, he announced as Red Hawk prepared the sacred tobacco. "It carries the breath of our ancestors, the promise of our descendants." One by one, the leaders of both groups, Apache, elders and settler patriarchs alike, accepted the pipe, drawing the smoke and offering it to the 4 directions. When it came to Sarah, Tall Pine nodded with particular solemnity. "Woman between worlds," he said, using her spirit name before. "The gathered allies, you who stand at the crossroads of peoples, take the pipe and seal what you have begun." As Sarah drew the sacred smoke, a ripple of recognition passed through the Apache gathering. Something shifted in that moment. The provisional acceptance. They had granted her hardening into something more permanent. Even Red Hawk, always careful of propriety, allowed his gaze to linger on her face with unmistakable pride. The alliance was sealed not just between tribes and settlers, but between Sarah and the people who had become her own. The night before their plan was to be executed, the Apache camp hummed with purposeful activity. Warriors prepared weapons, checking bowstrings and arrow fletching, oiling rifle mechanisms and sharpening knives. Women packed emergency supplies, food, medicine and water that could be quickly distributed if evacuation became necessary. Even the children contributed, gathering extra firewood and helping to camouflage the most visible lodges. Sarah moved among them, no longer an outsider but not quite fully one of them either. Woman between worlds in both name and reality. Yeah. Tribe had accepted Sheriff Holloway's intelligence. Westfield planned to move his main force at dawn, simultaneously attacking the Apache camp and those settlement families he suspected of Indian sympathy. "The young warriors are eager," Morningstar commented as she and Sarah packed a medicine bundle with healing herbs. "They think only of glory and battle." "And you?"